Hi, this is Zachary and Elizabeth, and thanks for tuning in to Simply Enough.
If you're liking our podcast, we'd love it if you'd share with your friends and family.
And then rate and review to raise our visibility and spread the message of enoughness.
We love you, and remember, you are simply enough.
Just as you are.
Period. Welcome to Simply Enough, where we celebrate you.
Because you are enough. Just as you are.
Period.
Last week's episode really hit me, and I kept coming back to this internal narrative in my mind of rejection.
I think our recording needs to be on expectations. I do think so. It's been something I've been thinking about as well.
There are only two questions to ask to determine if you qualify for assistance. Are you a human being and do you have a problem you can't solve on your own? Congratulations, you are worthy, you deserve help.
But don't in any way think that you need to excuse or explain away or even take on self-blame of scorekeeping and keeping tabs. Because if you remove the emotion from it, then what you are doing is truly observing whether there is a balance or imbalance of the give and take of a healthy relationship.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Simply Enough. I'm Mr. Zachary Leonard.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Ignacio.
And we're just gonna jump right into it today. So I want our listeners to know, and I want you to know, Dr. Ignacio, that I, because of the process of editing the video again and listening to it primarily from a listener standpoint to take out redundancy or ums or ahs or gaps or pauses or things, I can really get into the message kind of cycling back again and again and again and again. And it is true, like, you know, you kind of have to listen to things a couple times in order for them to really sink in. And thank God I do that, because they do really sink in. So I really was stuck after going through the process of editing or revising on this idea of rejection. We ended the podcast talking, or kind of tangentially referring to the idea of asking for help, and then the expectation of somebody stepping up and showing up for you, and also the potential that rejection could exist. And I was wondering why I have this, this little voice, this little Zachary voice in his mind that's like, don't ask for help, because they're going to say no. And what happens if they say no? Right? And then you're not going to ask for help again, because the next time they're just going to say no. And I put these expectations out there as if, one, they're true, and two, they're going to come to be on others. And I started wondering where that came from. And in my adolescence, in recognizing that I was different, and then eventually being able to figure out that difference meant that I was, part of the queer community, and wanting to, at the time, come out to people. That's a vulnerable conversation, and in sharing something like that with a friend, a loved one, a teacher, a family member, there is a tremendous amount of risk that what you're saying to them may be so off-putting that they decide to sever the relationship or decide that that's just not something they can accept. And I will admit, I had to steel myself for those conversations, because I didn't want to be rejected, right? I didn't want somebody to say, I can't handle that, or I don't accept that, or, I don't accept you for that, or I disagree, etc. And I was placing expectations on that person, hoping that they would meet them, which means that they would hug me and say, I love you no matter what. And it would be all in, like, it's okay, it's not a problem. And if it were anything less than that, anything less than full on support, my guard went up, and I was like, it was a no. It was either a full yes or is a full no. There was no gray area. There was no room for growth or understanding or whatnot. So in preparation for today's episode, I wanted to understand where my blind spots were with that kind of thinking, because I know that it's affected me as an adult being willing to step out and say to somebody, will you help me? And I came to this really great article. Well, first I was like, let's go to Brene Brown. I mean, she's, our go-to person, right? Yeah. We love you, Brene. Hopefully one day you'll listen. So anyway, I think I Googled asking for help, rejection, Brene Brown. And I came to this great article, which I'll find a way to share out and link out to all of our listeners. It wasn't written by Brene Brown, but this person references Brene Brown. what's interesting about it is there's one piece that I'm going to read that like immediately got me thinking like, oh, I was thinking about this not in the wrong way, but I think I think I need to change my focus because this makes sense for me. And then it got into shame and blame.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want to read a piece of this for you, and it's going to kind of bring up a bunch of different things. So I'm just going to bring it up, and then I'm just going to turn it over to you and see like what comes up for you.
Okay.
Okay, but it's just spot on. Okay, okay. So we took a little bit of a pause because there might be some issues or glitches with the audio. So hopefully listeners stay with us. We understand that there might be a little bit of pinging or kind of a metallic sound or something. Maybe I can fix it in the post. Who knows? That's what the lingo, the industry people say, fix it in post. But
Oh,
if not, just bear with us. We know the video might be even a little glitchier. So to our viewers, our proud viewers, the few of you, like we know, we love you.
Mom.
Thank you
No,
for watching.
okay.
I mean, they get the real goods. Let's be honest. But to our listeners, just know that this episode may have just a little bit of a difference in audio quality. So where we took a pause was I was going to share this article that I found. The article was written. It's on this website called verilymag.com. I don't really know much about that website, so I haven't perused it to say whether or not I support it or stand by it. I just found this article, and this was written by this person named Margaret Brady. Margaret Brady later on, well, goes on in to talk about shame and blame, and shame and blame largely out of inspiration from Brene Brown and her book I Am Enough. That's a really long title, and then it ends with I Am Enough. But what struck me, okay, was about expectations and also rejection. Because if I think about it, rejection is actually the expectation of a no, right? Going into a conversation was my way of thinking. I'm anticipating a no, or I'm placing an expectation on the other person. In addition, I had already set up in my mind in coming out to a friend or family loved one that if they didn't embrace me fully 100%, that meant that they were rejecting me. Okay. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that was my thinking at the time. And that has permeated my broad ability to ask for help. And then fast forward to our conversation last week, our podcast episode. Oh, wait, actually, you said it beautifully. There's strength
You're
in
not being strong.
not being strong. I was like, in not having strength. That's not it at all. There's strength in not being strong. Yes, thank you. Okay, so let me read to you this part. Okay. Nora Bouchard, formerly Nora Claver, is a certified executive coach and leadership development expert. She's also the author of Mayday, Asking for Help in Times of Need, which is an essential manual for anyone who needs to practice breaking through the shame barrier to get help. Bouchard writes that one of the hardest steps can be identifying that you're in need. It can be especially tough because when a person needs help, it's often at an upsetting time. Her brain is moving so fast, frantically trying to find a solution that she may not notice her personal distress signals. Losing sleep, becoming more impatient, diet changes, or a sudden onset of headaches can all be signs it's time to get help. We also have to give ourselves a break. Bouchard, like Brene Brown, says that self-compassion is absolutely necessary to break through our blame and shame culture. Most of us are accustomed to thinking in terms of the deserving and the undeserving needy, the people who are worthy versus those whose problems aren't big enough to justify our aid. Sometimes we don't even notice that we're doing it. Okay, are you ready for this? The truth is, I know so much, right? It's just chock full of really great little nuggets. The truth is, there are only two questions to ask to determine if you qualify for assistance. Are you a human being and you have a problem you can't solve on your own? Congratulations, you are worthy. You deserve help. Okay, so that alone, I was like, wow, yeah, like to just reframe my thinking. Then a little further down, perhaps most counterintuitively, Bouchard writes that gratitude should actually come before getting your answer. For someone like me who fears rejection, and that's Zachary right here, fears rejection, putting gratitude first can puncture the balloon of anxiety that floats up when I get vulnerable in front of somebody else. Gratitude makes us look at life from a position of abundance and strength. It means hearing no does not have to be devastating because I'm aware there are plenty of other times I have heard yes.
Mm-hmm.
So a thought about this. I was on the island of Maui a couple years ago. I was there. I was at a beach. I was there alone. I ended up making some friends on the beach. Went into the water. Didn't realize that the undertow was very strong. Now I'm a decent
Mm.
swimmer. I'm not an excellent swimmer, but I'm a decent swimmer. I also know some of the signals to indicate that the undertow is particularly strong, and then also what happens if you find yourself working against the undertow and what to do. Usually, like swim along the coast rather than directly back, so to not fatigue yourself. Okay. Long and the short of it is I was in the water with my friend Brad, and the undertow was so bad that we didn't realize kind of how far we were getting pulled out. Okay. As I was trying to swim along the coast, I also didn't realize how waterlogged I was getting. Luckily, Brad had enough wherewithal to call for help. And all these people came out, like they're on surfboards or boogie boards and whatnot. And they came out and rescued us. Okay. We got on land, and literally water is just dripping out of me, right? I had retained that much water in such a short amount of time. And I said, I turned to Brad and I just said, thank you. Like I didn't realize I needed help. I didn't realize that I was past the point of no return. And he goes, that's the thing about help. Sometimes it's too late at the time that you realize it.
Mm.
As we're reading this article, I just thought about that moment and the catastrophic events on all of us if we wait until it's almost too far past the point of return. So I'm going to pause there because I've done a lot of talking. I know I've thrown a lot: expectations, shame, blame, asking for help, rejection, gratitude. And I'm just going to flip it to you and see what's come up for you based on what I brought
God.
into, or not. I don't know. But just what I brought and where I left off last episode, and what was really sticking with me, and what I was wrestling with, and what I wanted to come back to today.
It's funny that you say that, because that statement, that sentiment that you said at the end of last week's episode, where we're talking about strength, and it's okay to be
Mhm.
vulnerable and to ask for help, and that it's not something brave. It actually, should be seen as normal and
Normal.
natural. And I remember, actually, and it stuck with me, your question of, yeah, but there can come a point of, how do you frame it so that if you keep getting rejected, then you're just not going to put yourself out there to
Right.
ask. My instantaneous gut reaction to that question is, then it's just not the right person to ask. That it's not a reflection on you. Was the wrong, and I hate saying right or wrong, but
Right.
perhaps not the best person to ask, because that person does not show up for you. And especially if that
Mhm.
same person does do that pattern as you described. You said, when if you keep getting no,
Mhm.
then I'm not going to ask. My question is, no, keep asking, just not that same person.
Yes.
so that's one thing relative to blame and shame. See how you internalize
Mhm.
the rejection, that it was a reflection on you, as
Mhm.
opposed to, okay, well, if it is a reflection on you, it's just a matter of the judgment of who you were putting that hope and faith on, of showing up for you. So it's
Right.
it's 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 not always you. um but the second thing that I wanted to also say is there's a saying: expectation is resentment under construction. So when you show up with expectations of how somebody else needs to show up for you, as opposed to just, whether it's with gratitude or not, just recognizing you're speaking your truth, and you're speaking
Mhm.
authentically, and you are asking for help. And if in authentically asking for help, you you that person does not show up for you, or says, no, I'm not going to help you, then at least that's an answer to the authentic you. And
Mhm.
therefore, no resentment needs to be there. It's actually more, okay, lesson learned. That's not
Mhm.
my person. That's not my people.
Mhm.
So that's one thing relative to, you know, expectations and blame and shame, and how quickly one can take it as a reflection of oneself. Like, oh, I was rejected. They rejected me. As
Yep.
opposed
Yeah.
to, I actually bravely, if we're going to use that word right now, but hopefully at
Mhm.
some point
Yeah.
naturally,
Right.
ask for help, and then that person didn't help. then okay, there's my answer. And with that answer, I know better. And when I know better, I do better, meaning next time I'm not going to rely on that person. And
Right.
then there's no resentments, because resentments, not unlike grudges, right? And expectations are resentments under construction. The resentments really only affect the person holding the resentment.
Mhm.
A lot of the
It's
times
true.
the person that said no to helping you, or the person that didn't show up, is oblivious and or doesn't care about the fact that they didn't show up for you, or that they didn't
Mhm.
help you. And that hurts. That's the snake bite, right? So that hurts, but the resentment is the poison that keeps
Mhm.
circulating within you. The snake bite's done.
Right.
Nobody's ever died from the snake bite, but the residual poison that keeps circulating, that's what kills a
Mhm.
person. It's not the snake bite, it's the
Right.
poison that remains. And so that's where resentment can be, and a grudge can be, and and judgment can be, whether it's judging yourself that you weren't worthy, and oh darn it, now I shouldn't ask for help, or even judging that person, like, okay, well, now that person's a jerk for saying no. No,
Right.
no, there doesn't even have to be any emotional resentment on it. It's just, okay, I authentically showed up, I asked for help, that was your
Mhm.
answer, lesson learned. I'm not going to judge you as a bad person, but I am going to say, lesson learned, not going to
Mhm.
go to you um, for help. But it doesn't
Right.
mean don't ever ask for help. It's just
Right.
different person, who will show up for me.
Yeah. A rejection from one person doesn't mean that you will be rejected by everybody,
Correct.
which I know, when I was younger, just the ability to have that kind of perspective and say somebody saying I can't deal with your queerness, or that I don't accept that, or whatever, which feels like a rejection of me, really is more about them. But when you're
Yeah.
17 years old, 18, it's very difficult to have that kind of perspective. And I would say that my tendency, which is not the case now, thank God for growth and friends and good people, but was to think that one person saying I can't, this is not okay with me, doesn't mean that that's everyone's response. And the residual trauma, or the residual damage or collateral damage that then I could carry into the next potential conversation, is not fair to the person that may want to show up for me, that I am, now even more guarded, or placing the expectations on them that they will say no. And that's so hard, right? It's so hard because I think about this podcast, for example, and I'm just going to put it out there. There were people that I thought would listen. There were people that I thought would listen. I'm not gonna, spill the tea and like call anybody out. I'm not gonna do that. But I'm just gonna say, there, if I were to make the list of my people that I thought would listen, there are people on that list that do not. Okay, and I guess I can say that because they're not going to listen. So who cares, right? but but there's a little bit of a grieving it
Yes.
too, which is like, oh, I thought this was our relationship,
Hmm.
and it's not. When people show you who they are, believe them,
That's right.
right? You've shown me. But the gratitude piece was like, okay, so I don't have to throw it all out, right? And I now can have a more nuanced understanding of our relationship. That to me was the chunk out of that article that kind of just stopped me in my tracks and said, "Well, wait a minute. I'm automatically going to a place of, if I ask for help, I'm going to be rejected, rather than coming from a place of gratitude first." That just like that was a big takeaway for me.
May I add, though, that it's also okay if it's not from a place of gratitude, if that's almost too much on the end of the spectrum,
Sure.
that one can't quite reach there or see there yet. That's okay.
Yeah.
It's again just the objective. So not even having to place a positive twist on it, just as much as we don't want to linger in negative resentment and grudge
Mhm.
holding. Just objectively, okay, I asked, there was no help,
Mhm.
carry on and pivot, and who might be a person that I can ask.
Yeah.
um that's a valuable reframing, if one can't get to the point of, well, I'm grateful that the snake revealed itself. Like, like that's sometimes about the
Right.
most that one can be grateful for. Is literally though, it is something to be
Yeah.
grateful for, which is good to know. That's it.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna judge, and I'm not gonna label that person evil, and I'm not even gonna label that person selfish, because who knows, that person's going through something in their life as well. But it's just kind of a, okay, good to know.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm just smiling because uh, I'm going to quote um, the Gospel according to Ted Lasso, which is
Your
the great
favorite show?
theologian and philosopher Ted Lasso, which is different people are different people. So the operating manual, or the iOS, the operating system that we have for ourselves, might not be for another person, or one person's operating manual might be different from another. And especially if we're not going to authentically say, here is my operating manual and this is how I see the world, but I'm not going to tell you my operating manual, but I'm going to expect you to read my
Right.
mind.
Right.
um then that's a disservice to all parties involved. But
Hmm.
once you show up and say, um, I feel in need of this, can you show up this way? And the
Hmm.
answer is, I ain't showing up that way. Or what are you crazy asking me to show up that way?
Hmm.
Again, without disdain and without judgment, just an objective, okay, good to know. You showed yourself, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that I I admit I'm putting it out there too. Wow, today I'm going all in. Uh, I keep tabs. And I admit that too. I do keep tabs sometimes, which is I keep tabs on the way in which I've stepped up for you. So now it's your turn to step up for me, which I'm like, is now I'm like, well, Zach, hold on a second. You didn't give to that other person expecting to get something back. That's really not the way you go through life. That's not the way I go through life at all. So, but when I had some of those moments where I was just being honest about what I was thinking or feeling, thinking about the people who don't listen to this podcast that I expected, and there was that grieving of all the moments that I showed up for them. There was that little bit of a moment of like, but but I but I was there for you, you know, and mm, that's also something that I'm just now really aware of and recognizing and then letting go of.
The scorekeeping and the keeping tabs, there is emotion to it.
Hmm.
So, yes, perhaps if there's a way to remove the emotion to the keeping tabs and the weighing, if that can be kept in check, that is a healthier way to go. But don't in any way think that you need to excuse or explain away or even take on self blame of scorekeeping and keeping tabs. Because if you remove the emotion from it, then what you are doing is truly observing whether there is a balance or imbalance of the give and take
Mm,
of a healthy relationship.
mm,
So, in putting meaning on it from emotion of scorekeeping and keeping tabs, and therefore now with that emotion, there is also self analysis and self blame and self shame. Doesn't mean you go all the way to the opposite extreme and say, well, that was bad of me to keep score. And
yeah.
so, no, okay, all is well. And good thing that I learned that about myself. So, all is well. Is it though? Because when you remove the emotion of the scorekeeping and the tab keeping, it doesn't remove the imbalance.
Hmm. You're right. Yeah, you're right.
It's very easy to sweep under the rug, especially if one feels self blame, like I'm not a scorekeeper and I'm not a tab checker.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
that's not how I live my life. That's not me. Now all of a sudden, it's an identity on you. Holy
Hmm.
gaslighting or projecting or
Yeah.
whatever terminology we want to use.
This is thick. I mean, and I'm so glad that we came back to. No, I mean, really. Yeah, yeah, but that's a sound bite.
Like,
Truly, because this is where it gets really gritty, and that's because there's so many practical connections to day-to-day life. You know, I'm your co-host, and I spent however much time re-listening and listening to our episode, just marinating on this, and from it, it's I can think of 10 examples in the last week that connect with everything that we've talked about today. I mean, this is life on the ground as we are currently living it. It is thick.
because I will, this is going to come out articulate because it all just inarticulate because it just all came at once. Sorry. Um, Again, relative to the scorekeeping and the tab keeping, that um, there is emotion to that. It doesn't remove
Mhm,
the objective imbalance. And then in looking at the imbalance, one can then also objectively, rather than have expectations, have standards. And that's different. Meaning, for expectations, I am expecting you to behave a certain way. And if you don't, then
mhm,
I'm judging you. Whereas standards, so that comes from a place of lack, and that I'm
yeah,
asking you and expecting you to fill something in me and of
mhm,
me and from my operating manual that I expect of you. Standards are actually coming from a place of wholeness, which is I am whole. I know that this particular these situations, this type of relationship is what fulfills me and helps me grow. And
mhm,
if you are not of that same mindset, I'm not going to judge you because you're not filling a void, but I am going to recognize that we are of a different mindset, um,
yeah,
and therefore there's not a fit there. Do you see what I'm
yep,
saying?
totally see what
So
you're saying.
there's a difference between expectations and standards, and just like there's difference in terms of capacity and capability because of being very giving and empathic
Mhm,
and very others oriented. That is how you approach relationships, and that
mhm,
is the
mhm,
standard you hold to
mhm,
yourself. You hold of yourself that standard, that you know I am Zachary Leonard, and I'm going to show up to in this relationship. And what I mean by a relationship is that I show up being thoughtful of that person's values, and
mhm,
and and
mhm,
and being respectful of that person's times, and honoring that person's um, uh, priorities
mhm,
and dreams. And I want to be supportive of that. So because that's how you show up, because that's the standard you hold to yourself,
mhm,
that is the type of relationship that you hold as a standard.
mhm.
It's a little different, subtle nuance. It's not just semantics of expectations. So
Yeah,
another
yeah,
person shows up with different standards of, I don't know why Zachary's making such a big deal about it. I mean, look, I do this, this, and this, so I
right.
can keep score too. So why isn't that enough? And that's enough for me. Okay, then that's
Mhm,
that person's standard. And if the standards are
mhm,
different, no better, no worse, no
mhm,
no high maintenance, no low maintenance. It's
mhm,
just standards.
mhm,
We
mhm,
don't have to apologize it away. We don't have to excuse that away. We don't have to self shame away
mhm.
standards, as long as we are not putting emotional judgment
Yeah,
on the other person.
yeah.
I just wanted to
It's
point that out.
it's no, it's important, because you're well, obviously it's important for a lot of different reasons, and I'm glad that you separated that out, because very silly example, but to just articulate kind of where my brain is thinking. Um, Chivalry aside, whether or not it's actually misogynistic or everything, let's just suspend any controversial or political conversation about whether or not holding the door for somebody is actually right or wrong or demeaning or us. Okay, so let's just put that aside.
Sure.
So I repeatedly open the door for somebody. If I'm walking into a store and I know there's three or four, five people behind me, I will hold the door to let them go in. Man, woman, child, doesn't matter. Like, it's just, I'm gonna hold the door for them. If somebody opens the door for me, obviously, I acknowledge them, I say thank you, and I walk in. More often than not, people don't say thank you. So I'm just gonna put that out there. I was with a friend of mine, and in classic Zachary form, I go to open the door, and somehow there's now like 30 people. Like, who knows where all these people came from? But all of a sudden, it's just like this like mad rush into this store. Okay, and my friend's now in the store, like kind of pissed. It's like, well, now I got to wait for you to be all kind, right, and open the door. So friend comes back, it's standing there as people are coming through. I think maybe 2 people out of the 30, let's just say, said thank you. And as we walk in together, I'm just like going about my business, and he says, "Did you notice what happened?" And I said, "I know there were a lot of people, right? Who knew that they were all going to come out?" And he's like, "No, did you notice that only 2 people said thank you?" And I said, "No, I didn't notice." And he goes, "That's really frustrating that people are not considerate, blah, blah," and kind of went down this tirade. And I said, "But that's not why I do it. I do it because my standard is that fulfills me in the same way that in my mind, I'm doing an act of kindness for other people, regardless of whether or not they give me anything back." And so what you're saying just kind of in my mind sparks that, like, the clarity of purpose or the clarity of intention, and also clarity about what's happening, allowed me not to see or place expectation on people giving me something back. It was more like I was doing something with the full awareness of what it brought to me and why I was doing it, rather than expecting something in return. So I was holding myself to a standard and also letting go of the expectations. Very silly example.
No, it's a great
That
example.
that to me captures the importance of exactly why you delineated between the two.
And I'm going to actually use that very same example for one little thing as well, if you don't
Right.
mind, which is your friend wasn't wrong either,
No.
and he wasn't high maintenance or anything, because his standard
Yep.
was to say thank you. How can you
Yep.
not say thank you? And that's his standard. And
Hmm.
there's also this saying, what you accept, you get; what you permit persists. And
Hmm.
so with your friend's standard, he would never, I would imagine, hold the door open for that long, you know,
Right.
if for 30 people and only 2 said thank you. Like, he wouldn't do it. And that's great on him, and that's
Hmm.
great on you
Yep.
that it didn't bother you. And that's where, again, there is no right or wrong in standards.
Hmm.
It's when there is resentful expectations that is actually harmful to the holder of the resentment and the holder of the
Hmm.
expectations. Because 9 times out of 10, in handing over your resentment and expectations to the person that you're resenting, they don't even know. And they're like, "I don't want it.
Yeah, they don't.
What are
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
resentful for?" And then
Yeah.
that's a double wound to you. Now you've been,
Yes.
then now you've been bitten by the snake twice. Right.
Twice. Yes.
Yeah. So your friend was not wrong or worse, and you were not, better or right. It
Better.
was
Right.
a difference of standard, um,
Hmm.
and that's all. It just objectively,
Yeah.
that's all. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was actually
And
a
we
very
actually had.
illustrative story
Oh, well, thank you.
with on so many layers. Especially, like, in relationships, whether it's adults or whether it's, kids and teenagers right now, like, remember that, you get what you accept, and
Mhm.
what you permit persists. So there is, in that realm of expectations and resentment and grudges and disappointment, you have power and you have control
Mhm.
over whether or not you're going to, at the very least, repeatedly have the expectations and repeatedly
Right.
have the resentment. That's where it's just kind of a little bit of a, why do you keep going to the same pond?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. When there's no
Why are you
water, you hate the
laughing?
water.
Yeah.
No, it's just our metaphors are all over the place, and they're so spot on. I mean, they really are. You know. And I was just, I don't know if you caught my smile while you were talking, but I thought, who does this really well actually articulates what their standards are and what their needs are beautifully are children. And one of the things
Yes.
that I loved most about being a kindergarten and a first grade teacher was you didn't really have to give 6 and 7 year olds that much encouragement. They already knew what bothered them. You just needed to help give them the language, or at least the strategies to be able to say to another person, I don't like what you're doing right now. And what was also really beautiful was the recipient, more often than not, heard it and was like, okay, I'm sorry. Like, the purity of how humans can actually communicate to each other and work to support and be present for each other exists no more beautifully than in the hearts and minds and voices of children. And then we adults just kind of mess it up.
Well, it's not our fault because we learned that too, and it just
No,
gets
I know,
passed
I know,
on in
I know. I just,
generations.
well, I would just say that I had so many takeaways from last episode, and now I have even more. My mind is a little bit of a sponge. We do like to kind of come to a little bit of a button, to take in a musical turn, a little bit of a button on our episodes. But I'm just going to say, uh, I my head is swimming in a good way, of all of these different thoughts of uh, expectations, standards, um, rejection, resentment, just some of these big words that we've talked about, and how messy it is. And then, just because this is often how I summarize or come back to, is just the opportunity to work through these things with somebody who I think is one of my people, you, Dr. Ignacio. I'm grateful to have this time with you, and then also to be able to share our conversations with others, because I do believe that these little nuggets do affect people, and they take them, and they go off with them. So so I don't have a big takeaway today, and that's okay. Other
And
than
that's
I'm taking
okay.
away a lot.
But I love you and thank you for first of all, thank you for all the editing that you do. And then
Oh,
from the
yes.
editing, so many talking points come out of that. So thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you
Of
to
course.
you. Thank you to our listeners and our viewers. And stick with us. We're all a work in
Mhm.
progress, but we'll go uh, farther and faster together.
Yeah. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Love you.
Love you. That's right. You